Alabama, 1973. The night was humid, the smell of wet earth mixed with the burnt oil from the old cars parked on the street. William Carter pulled his brown overcoat closer around him, adjusted his hat, and made his way to the small neighborhood grocery store. At 72, William had seen a lot. He had fought in 2 wars, survived enemies on the battlefield, and returned home expecting to find respect. But America in the 70s was still no home for a black man, even a war hero. He entered the U store, greeting the owner, a friendly Italian named Salvatore. He picked up bread, coffee, and some milk, paying with exact change. Before he left, Salvatore said in a low voice, "Mr. Carter, I hear the patrol is getting more aggressive lately. Be careful." William just nodded. He wasn't afraid of the cops. He had faced Nazi soldiers and Koreans, men far more lethal. But Salvatore had reason to be concerned. Outside, as he walked back toward the house, the sound of tires screeching caught his attention. A black car screeched to a halt on the corner. 2 deputies got out. One was Deputy Sheriff Earl Whitaker, a tall white man with a look of pure hostility in his eyes. The other, a young rookie named Jimmy Ray, looked hesitant but not about to cross his partner. "Hey, old man," Whitaker shouted. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" William remained calm. "Just going home, sir." "Home? And since when are your people allowed in this area at this hour?" Whitaker laughed, spitting on the ground. Jimmy Ray looked at his partner, looking uncomfortable. "Sheriff, I think he's just a veteran." "So what? That doesn't make him any less suspicious." William clenched his hands in an old reflex. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to scream. But he knew how this would end. So he chose silence. But Whitaker didn't like silence. "Let's see if this old man is hiding something. Hands on the wall." William hesitated. That small delay was enough for Whitaker to push him hard, making the old man fall to his knees on the asphalt. "I said hands on the wall," he shouted. Then came the blows. The first was a blow with the baton to the ribs, then another to the leg. William grunted but did not scream. He would not give his attacker that pleasure. Jimmy Ray watched, distraught. He did not want to be a part of this, but the fear of contradicting Whitaker spoke louder. That was when something flashed. In the street. Not a light, but a reflection. Someone was watching everything from the other side of the sidewalk. A young, thin black man hiding behind a trash can was holding a camera and hurriedly taking pictures. If those pictures got out, it could be the sheriff's undoing. But before the young man could run away, Whitaker noticed. "Hey, who the hell is that?" He pulled out his gun. The young man took off running. Shots echoed in the night. And there, on his knees on the ground, William felt the pain. But inside him, something else burned. Anger. Chapter 1. Final scene. The next day, a phone call crossed the country. On the other end of the line, a man heard the shaky voice of a childhood friend. "Damien, it's about your father. They hurt him." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Damien Carter opened his eyes, and in them there was only one certainty. He was coming home. And someone would pay for this. Secret Military Base, Nevada. 1973. The blazing sun burned the Nevada desert, reflecting off the metal of the aircraft and the camouflaged vehicles of the base. Inside one of the most protected hangars, a group of men were performing hand-to-hand combat training. The blows were fast, brutal. One of them fell to the ground, groaning. The instructor just shook his head. "Again." The tone of his voice was low, firm. Damien Carter did not accept failure. The soldiers around him were sweating nervously. They knew the legend. Carter was no ordinary officer. He was the predator in the shadows, the commander of Delta Force's most feared unit. He'd fought in jungles and deserts, taken out targets with pinpoint precision, and survived missions no other man would have come back to tell about. But today, Damien wasn't focused. Something was wrong. As he watched the training, his chest felt heavy, a sense that something bad had happened. Then a soldier approached. "Major Carter, you have an urgent call." Damien frowned. Few people had direct access to him. When he picked up the phone, he recognized the shaky voice on the other end. "Damien, it's about your father. They hurt him." The world stopped for a moment. "What happened?" Damien asked, his voice colder than ever. "Cops. They beat him, Damien. And there's more. A kid took pictures, but they're after him too. If they catch him—" The sound of the phone being hung up echoed through the office. The call to war. Damien had never liked Alabama. Growing up as a black boy in the American South meant learning early to swallow his anger, to hide from dangerous eyes. But his father had always told him, "Don't let the world decide who you are. You're stronger than they think." And now, they'd hurt this man. Without hesitation, Damien grabbed his gear and walked to his commander. "I need immediate leave." The general in front of him raised an eyebrow. "You never take time off, Carter. What's wrong?" "Family matters. Personal." The general sighed. "You can't go to war every time something pisses you off, son." Damien held his superior's gaze for a moment. The muscles in his jaw twitched, but his voice remained calm. "I'm not going to war. The war has come to my family." The general realized he couldn't hold him back. He signed the papers and said only one thing. "Try not to leave a trace this time." Damien grabbed his leather jacket, put on his sunglasses, and went outside. It was time to go home. The return to Alabama. 2 days later, a black Dodge Charger drove down the dusty roads of the American South. The radio was playing Marvin Gaye, but Damien barely heard the music. Every road sign reminded him of his childhood. Every patch of dry earth brought back memories he'd rather forget. He reached the city just before sunset. His first stop was the hospital. When he walked into the room, he saw his father sitting up in bed, his head bandaged, a cut on his lip, and one of his eyes still swollen shut. William Carter looked up and smiled. "Son, you're back." Damien's chest tightened. He wasn't a man of emotions, but seeing his father like that, it just wasn't right. He sat down next to the bed. "What happened, Dad?" William sighed, looking out the window. "Those cops, they wanted to show they still rule here. I know those kinds of people. I've seen them before, decades ago. They just changed the uniforms." Damien felt his fists clench involuntarily. William noticed. He placed his hand over his son's. "Listen carefully, boy. I know what you want to do, but you're not in the army anymore. There are no rules here, no protocol. This is another war." Damien looked at his father, his voice a cold whisper. "So I fight without rules." The missing youth. Before leaving the hospital, Damien received one more piece of information. The young man who took the photos of the attack on his father was missing. His name was Ricky Johnson, 17 years old. An orphan, raised on the streets. He always carried a camera, dreaming of being a journalist. But now no one knew where he was. Damien left the hospital and got into his car. If this boy was still alive, he would find him. And if someone was after him, then that someone had just become his next target. Alabama, 1973. Night. The city seemed peaceful at first glance. The streetlights flickered dimly, and the warm night wind dragged dust through the empty streets. But Damien Carter knew that behind this false calm, there was a rotten system running the place. He wasn't here to hang out. He had a name, a purpose, and a clock ticking against him. Ricky Johnson was missing. The kid who had the nerve to take pictures of the assault on William Carter was now in danger. And if Damien had learned anything from the wars he'd fought, it was that witnesses disappeared first. First stop, the Silver Moon Bar. If there was one place where rumors traveled faster than alcohol, it was the Silver Moon, a small bar on the dark side of town. Damien parked his Dodge Charger in front and went in. The place was smoky, with an old record player playing Curtis Mayfield. In the background, men played cards, women danced, and a few suspicious glances were cast in the direction of the stranger in the leather jacket and sunglasses. Damien walked up to the bar and faced the bartender. "I'm looking for a boy. Ricky Johnson. He disappeared last night." The bartender, a pot-bellied man with thinning hair, drained a glass and laughed. "Who the hell are you to ask me?" Damien took off his glasses and looked him in the eye. His gaze was ice-cold. "Someone who can ask you a question in a much less polite way." The entire bar fell silent. The bartender hesitated, then looked at a man in the corner. Someone Damien had noticed before he even walked in. Meeting Big Joe. The man was big, dressed in a cheap suit, and smoking a cigar like he owned the place. Big Joe Sims. One of the middlemen for the dirty business that ran through the city. Damien grabbed a glass of whiskey and sat down at his table. "I need some information." Big Joe laughed. "Man, you come in here all tough and think anyone's going to help you? This town has rules, soldier." Damien took a sip of his whiskey and leaned forward. "Rules? I've seen them before. They're always the same. Whites rule, blacks obey. But there's one problem with all that." Big Joe raised an eyebrow. Damien smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I've never been good at following the rules." Big Joe stopped laughing. The tension in the air was palpable. Then, finally, he sighed. "Ricky Johnson. He was seen trying to sell a roll of film yesterday. Got caught by some sheriff's deputies." Damien tightened his fingers around the glass. "Where?" Big Joe hesitated. "They say they took him to the old slaughterhouse on the edge of town. But listen, if he's still alive, he won't be for long. The sheriff doesn't like to let people go if they see too much." Damien stood and placed a $20 bill on the table. "Drinks are on me, but if you hear anything else, find me before I find you." Big Joe nodded slowly. He understood the threat. The abandoned slaughterhouse Damien drove to the outskirts of town. The slaughterhouse was an old shed with rusty signs and a crumbling gate. The smell of decay still hung in the air. He turned off the engine and stood in silence for a moment. In wartime, this was the moment before an attack. The mind cleared, the body prepared. Then he saw it. 2 police cars parked outside. They were there. And so was Ricky. Damien took a deep breath and reached into the glove compartment for something. An old pocket knife. Small, simple, but in the right hands, more deadly than a gun. He opened the door and disappeared into the darkness. The hunt was on. Abandoned slaughterhouse. Alabama, 1973. The wind blew hard between the rusted walls of the slaughterhouse. The smell of rust, burning oil, and rotting meat permeated the air. Damien Carter watched the 2 patrol cars parked outside. 2 officers were leaning against their vehicles, talking and smoking. 2 others were inside the building, dealing with Ricky Johnson. He knew exactly how this would end. If he didn't do something, Ricky would be just another young black man who disappeared in the middle of the night. But this city was about to learn that Damien Carter didn't leave friends behind. He crouched down, tested the weight of the pocket knife in his hand, and moved through the darkness, silent as a predator. The first attack. The 2 officers outside were unprepared. They were laughing at some dirty joke, distracted. Damien emerged from the shadows without making a sound. The first officer didn't even have time to react. Crack. A sharp blow to the neck. The man was out before he realized he was being attacked. The second officer's eyes widened and he reached for his gun, but Damien was faster. In one fluid movement, he twisted the man's wrist, ripped the revolver from his waistband, and used the butt of it to knock him down. The impact broke his nose and knocked him unconscious to the ground. From start to finish, it took no more than 5 seconds. Rescue Damien grabbed the officer's gun and moved into the warehouse. The sounds echoed off the metal walls. A desperate voice. "I told you I have nothing. Please let me go." A cruel laugh. "The sheriff doesn't want to take any chances, kid. That camera has to go, and so do you." Damien advanced down the dark hallway, peering around the corner. 2 officers were there, holding Ricky, who was tied to an old chair and covered in blood. Anger rose in Damien's chest. He stepped closer. He waited for the right moment. Then, he deliberately knocked over an empty can. The noise made one of the officers turn around. "Who the f—" Before he could finish his sentence, Damien appeared from the shadows. He grabbed the first officer by the collar and threw him against the wall, striking him in the stomach with brutal precision. The man fell, coughing up blood. The second cop drew his gun, but Damien was already on him. He dodged to the side, grabbed his wrist and twisted it until he heard a snap. The cop's scream was muffled by Damien's punch to his temple. He fell, unconscious. Ricky, still tied up, stared wide-eyed. Who are you?" Damien took out a pocket knife and cut the ropes. "Someone who doesn't like to leave debts unpaid." Ricky rubbed his wrists, startled and relieved. I have the photos. They're hidden." Damien nodded. "Then let's get them. But first, we need to get out of here alive." The escape and the warning Damien helped Ricky to his feet and headed out of the shed. But just as they stepped onto the dirt, the headlights of a third patrol car came on down the road. Sheriff Earl Whitaker had just arrived. He calmly got out of the car, chewing on a toothpick, and looked at the cops lying on the ground. Well, it seems we have a new visitor in town." Damien and the sheriff stared at each other. There, in that moment, a silent war began. Whitaker smiled. "You must be Old Man Carter's son. They say you've been missing." Damien didn't answer. He just grabbed Ricky by the arm and started walking toward the car. "Where do you think you're going?" the sheriff asked. Damien paused for a moment and looked back. "Get this kid to safety. You got a problem with that?" Whitaker let out a low laugh. "Oh, I got a lot of problems with that, son. But I'll let you go. For today." Damien saw the game. The sheriff knew he now had a worthy enemy. But instead of killing him right away, he wanted to see how far Damien would go. That was a mistake. Because Damien Carter never backed down. He opened the car door, put Ricky in, and started the engine. Before he drove off, he glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw Whitaker watching him, his eyes full of something dangerous. "If he wants a game, then I'll give him a game." Damien stepped on the gas. The war was just beginning. Secret Hideaway, Alabama, 1973. Damien drove. Down the dark roads, Ricky in the passenger seat. The boy was still shaking, his face streaked with dried blood, but his eyes were clear. He had survived something most people wouldn't have. "Where are we going?" Ricky asked, holding a rag to a cut on his forehead. Damien didn't answer. Right away. His gaze was fixed on the road ahead. He knew a place. A safe place. After a few minutes, the car stopped in front of a small auto repair shop on the side of the road, hidden behind a row of trees. The sign read, "Eddie's Auto Repair." Damien turned off the engine and looked at Ricky. "This guy can help us, but don't trust him right away. He's only loyal when it comes to money or conscience." Ricky nodded, swallowing hard. He knew he wasn't out of the woods yet. Eddie, the ghost. The shop was dimly lit, smelling of grease and old oil. A radio was playing "Papa Was a Rolling Stone" by the Temptations. In the back, a thin, dark-skinned man with graying hair poked his head out from under the hood of a car. "I told you I'm closed for business," he grumbled. But when he saw Damien, his face changed. "Son of a bitch, I knew you'd come. Back someday?" Damien gave a half smile. "I need a favor." Eddie, the Phantom, was a former criminal who had spent years on the run from the police. He knew how to disappear when he needed to. If anyone could help Damien navigate the rot of the city without being noticed, it was him. Eddie looked at Ricky and sighed. "What the hell happened to that kid?" "The police," Damien answered, bluntly. Eddie spat on the ground. "Fucking bastards! Ever since Whitaker took over, this town has been a living hell." Damien crossed his arms. "I need to hide the kid. And I also need to know everything about the sheriff. Who's funding him? Who's covering his dirt?" Eddie ran his hand over his chin. "This is going to cost me." Damien pulled a wad of cash from his pocket and tossed it on the counter. Eddie grinned. "Now we speak the same language." He motioned for Ricky to follow him to the back of the shop, where there was a small room with an old couch and a few cans of food stacked up. "You stay here, kid. There's food, water, and a loaded revolver in the drawer. If anyone but me or the soldier in there comes in, shoot first and ask questions later." Ricky nodded, still nervous. Damien turned to Eddie. "Now tell me what you know. The web of corruption." Eddie took out a cigarette, lit it, and blew out the smoke slowly. "Whitaker's not just a cop. He's a mercenary." Damien narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Eddie leaned in. "That bastard doesn't just answer to the city. He's involved in a bigger scheme. His money comes from big people, politicians, businessmen, even some retired military men. They pay to keep things the way they've always been. And Whitaker does the dirty work." Damien was silent for a moment. "What if someone goes against him?" Eddie gave a humorless smile. "Either he disappears or gets accidentally killed." Damien felt his blood boil. It wasn't just one man who needed to go down. It was an entire system. A dangerous warning. Eddie stubbed out his cigarette and looked Damien straight in the eye. "Listen, I know you're tough. I know you've killed more men than I can count. But this isn't war, man. This is politics. And politics is a monster that swallows even the strongest." Damien didn't look away. "Maybe, but monsters bleed too," Eddie sighed. "Then I hope you have a plan, because Whitaker is going to come after you, and next time he won't mess around." Damien just smiled. "Good, me neither." He walked out of the garage, got in his car, and started the engine. Now he knew what he was up against. The question was, how far was he willing to go? Roadside, motel, Alabama, 1973. The room was small, lit only by the yellow glow of a worn lamp. The smell of cigarettes permeated the curtains, and the bed creaked under Damien Carter's weight as he sat on the edge of the mattress. On the table beside him, a .45 revolver rested next to a pack of cigarettes and a glass of cheap whiskey. He couldn't sleep. In war, nights were filled with the anticipation of battle. Now, the battlefield was his own city. And as much as he had faced enemies around the world, something here bothered him more than ever. He felt hatred. A hatred unlike anything he had ever experienced. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In the darkness of his mind, images from the past haunted him. Places on fire, bodies falling, men begging for their lives. He had always followed orders, but now there were no orders to follow. He opened his eyes and looked at the mirror opposite the bed. For a second, he didn't recognize the man he saw. Am I becoming like the monsters I hunt? But before he could answer his own question, there was a knock on the door. Open up, soldier! Eddie's voice. Damien grabbed his revolver and walked to the door, unlocking it. Eddie walked in quickly, looking around before closing it. We have a problem. Whitaker's counterattack. Eddie threw a newspaper on the bed. The headline read, Missing young man returned, but refuses to talk about kidnapping. And right below it was a picture of Ricky Johnson. Whitaker's smart, Eddie said. He knows the kid still has the pictures, but instead of going after him, he's changing the game. Damien frowned. What do you mean? Eddie sat back in his chair, crossing his arms. He's spreading the word that you attacked cops, that you're a dangerous outsider, a criminal. He's getting the whole town ready to hunt you down. Damien snorted. He wants me to hide, to stop messing around with things I shouldn't. Exactly. Damien picked up his glass of whiskey, took a sip, and looked out the window. It was a game of chess, and Whitaker was moving his pieces. But he'd made a mistake. Damien wasn't a pawn. He was the damn player. The first strike. What do you plan to do? Eddie asked. Damien turned to him. I'm going to start taking his empire apart, piece by piece. Eddie laughed, but he didn't sound amused. That's going to attract attention, soldier. You ready for war? Damien picked up his revolver from the table, checked the chamber, and fitted a silencer to the end. The war has already begun. Illegal gambling house. The nest. That same night, Damien parked the Charger in front of an illegal club that operated out of the back of an abandoned warehouse. Inside, men laughed, played cards, and counted dirty money. It was one of the places where the sheriff laundered part of the money he received from his sponsors. Damien entered unnoticed. The smell of alcohol and cigarettes filled the air. He walked past poker tables, taking in every detail. Then he found the man he was looking for. Ray Boone, one of the sheriff's henchmen, the one who did the dirty work when necessary. Damien approached calmly and sat at the table next to him. Good evening, Boone. The man looked up in surprise. Who the Before he could finish his sentence, Damien pulled out a knife and stabbed it into the tabletop, right next to Boone's hand. The entire bar stopped. Damien leaned forward, speaking softly. Tell your boss I'm not a problem that can be solved. Boone looked at the blade, and then at Damien. You have no idea what you're doing, Carter. Damien smiled. Yes, I do, and this is just the beginning. He got up and left the bar. Now Whitaker knew the tables had turned. Alabama streets, 1973. Rumors spread like wildfire. Someone was challenging Whitaker. In the barber shops, in the backwaters, in the dark alleys where the law couldn't reach, people talked about a man who had no fear. Did you hear? He faced the sheriff on the road and walked away like nothing had happened. They say he took down 3 deputies single-handedly at the slaughterhouse. He's back to avenge his father, and he won't stop until he's finished with Whitaker. Damien didn't like being treated like a legend. Legends are just stories. He was real. But one thing was certain. People were starting to believe they could fight. And that was dangerous. For Whitaker. The sheriff loses control. In the sheriff's office, cigar smoke filled the air. Whitaker held a newspaper, his fingers pressed tightly against the paper. The name Damien Carter was on everyone's lips. He looked at his men and spat the words like venom. You tell me this bastard is walking around town like a king and nobody did anything? Silence. Until Boone, still with the bandage on his hand where Damien stuck the knife, answered, He's not just anyone, boss. The guy knows how to kill. Whitaker laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. Then bring someone who knows it too. Boone swallowed. He knew exactly what that meant. Damien Carter was going to have company soon. The workers start to fight back. While Whitaker plotted his counterattack, the town was beginning to change. A group of black workers from the textile mill had gathered at one of their homes. They were men who were used to keeping their heads down. But that night, one of them, a gray-haired man named Clarence Lewis, stood up and said, They always told us it wasn't worth fighting, that if we tried, we'd end up dead or worse. But now there's a man taking on this damn sheriff all by himself. He looked around. What if he doesn't have to be alone? The looks in the room changed. The idea grew between them. Revolt was brewing. Damien discovers he's not alone. Eddie appeared in the doorway of the motel where Damien was holed up. A smile was on his face. "You've got fans, soldier." Damien frowned. "What are you talking about?" Eddie threw a folded newspaper on the bed. The headline read, "Workers demand Whittaker investigation. Protests planned in next few days." Damien took a deep breath. He wanted to take Whittaker down, but he didn't want other people to pay for it. This could end in bloodshed. Eddie nodded. Or it could end with the sheriff down. It depends on who plays that game better. Damien was silent for a moment. He had started this war alone, but now he was no longer the only soldier on the battlefield, and that meant the fight was just beginning. The sounds of protest echoed through the streets. Workers, mothers, students, veterans, they were all on their feet, demanding justice. Damien watched from the motel window. The people had finally found the courage to stand up, but courage without strategy was an invitation to slaughter. He knew Whittaker wouldn't stand still. The sheriff would respond with force, and that's exactly what happened. The sheriff's coup. The next morning, the papers carried a new headline: "Property damage. Protests spin out of control." Whittaker moved quickly. He had his men infiltrate the protests to wreak havoc and justify a violent attack. Now, on the radio and in the papers, he played the victim. "The city is under threat from criminals and rioters. This has to stop." He declared a curfew. Anyone caught on the streets after sundown would be arrested, or worse. But that wasn't his real plan. His real plan was in an abandoned warehouse in the industrial zone, where the sheriff was holding William Carter hostage. Eddie's warning. Eddie rushed into Damien's room. "Private, we have a problem." Damien turned, still staring out the window. "Just one?" Eddie tossed a crumpled piece of paper on the bed. Damien picked it up and read it. The note was short, but the punchline was right on target. "If you want your father alive, come, alone. No police, no protest, just you and me." Damien closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his gaze was full of pure hatred. Eddie exhaled. "This is a trap. He wants to catch you on his turf." Damien squeezed the note between his fingers. "Then I'll turn the tables." On the road to the final battle, Damien grabbed his leather jacket and adjusted his gun in its holster. Eddie shook his head. "You're really going alone?" Damien paused in the doorway. "The sheriff wants a duel, so I'm going to give him a damn duel." But what Whittaker didn't know was that Damien Carter never played fair. He drove to the warehouse, ready to end this war. Abandoned warehouse, Alabama, 1973. The silence inside was stifling. The smell of burning oil and rust permeated the air. Damien walked slowly across the concrete floor, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. He could feel the danger in the air. On the other side, tied to a chair, was William Carter. His face was bruised, but his eyes still shone with pride at the sight of his son there. And beside him, leaning casually against a stack of crates, was Sheriff Whittaker. "On time, soldier." Whittaker grinned, biting his toothpick. "Let my father go." Whittaker laughed. "And spoil the fun?" "No, I wanted to see you up close. The man everyone says is a legend. The war hero. The prodigal son who came back to save his people." He took a step forward. "But I see something else. I see a killer. A predator. Someone who lives to kill." Damien remained silent, his expression unwavering. "You know the difference between us, Carter?" Whittaker continued. "I never pretended to be the good guy. You, on the other hand, want to believe you're still a good soldier. But deep down, you're just like me. And when this night is over, you're going to prove it." Click! Whittaker drew his revolver and pointed. It had William. "Let's see who shoots first, soldier." The shot that changed everything time seemed to slow down. Whittaker pulled the trigger, but Damien was already moving. He rolled to the side, drew his pistol, and fired a well-aimed shot. Bang! The Impact sent Whitaker staggering, his shoulder bloody. He cried out in pain, but still managed to raise the gun again. Damien didn't hesitate. 2 more shots, one in the leg, another in the arm. Whitaker fell to his knees, gasping. His reign of terror was over. Damien walked slowly toward him and pointed the gun at his head. The sheriff laughed, spitting blood. "Come on, Carter. Finish the job. Kill me." Damien fell silent. Then he put the gun away. "No. I want you to rot in jail. I want you to watch this town rise up without you." He turned and walked over to William, cutting his bonds. His father looked at him with pride. "You made the right choice, son." But before they could leave, they heard the sound of metal scraping against the ground. Whitaker, bloodied, reached for a dropped gun. Damien just shook his head. "You never learn." Before Whitaker could pull the trigger, a shot rang out. But it wasn't Damien who fired. It was Ricky Johnson. The young man stood in the doorway, holding a pistol in shaking hands. Whitaker fell, dead. Silence filled the warehouse. Ricky looked at Damien, panting. I couldn't let him get away with it." Damien nodded. "You did what needed to be done." The war was over. But what would come next? Dawn in Alabama, 1973. The sun was slowly rising over the city, but this time something had changed. For the first time in years, there was no fear in the air. Sheriff Whitaker was dead. His henchmen had fled or been arrested. And the streets, that had once been silent, were now filled with voices that were finally rising. Damien Carter watched from afar, leaning against his black Dodge Charger, his arms crossed and his face impassive. His work was done. But one question still burned in his mind. Was this justice or revenge? The fate of Ricky Johnson. The young man who had pulled the trigger the night before was still shaking. Killing Whitaker had been necessary, but it hadn't been easy. William Carter, bandaged on his arms and face, sat beside him on the porch of Eddie's workshop. "Listen, kid, what you did doesn't define who you are. What you do after that, that will." Ricky looked at him, absorbing his words. "And what do I do now?" Damien walked over and handed him something. A new camera. "You go your own way, Ricky. You said you wanted to show the world the truth? Then do it. Show them what happened here." The boy held the camera like it was a treasure. "I'll make it worth your while." The last meeting of father and son. William Carter and Damien stood alone outside the workshop. The old veteran watched his son with a look of pride. "You did the right thing, but I know you haven't found your peace yet." Damien sighed, looking off into the distance. "I don't think you ever find people like me, Dad." William smiled. "Maybe not, but you can try." They hugged briefly. No words, just respect. Then Damien got into the car and started the engine. "Where are you going?" William asked. Damien glanced in the rearview mirror, a small smile on his face. "Wherever you need to be." The legacy of Damien Carter. As the Dodge Charger disappeared down the road, the Alabama town woke to a new day. The name Damien Carter would become legend. The story of the soldier who came home and stood up to a corrupt empire would inspire generations. But he wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who did what needed to be done. And for him, that was enough. Do you like stories of overcoming? Have you ever experienced a moment so strange or unusual that it seemed like it came straight out of a movie? Then you're in the right place. Here, we love sharing stories that touch the heart, inspire and make you reflect. But we want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. That special moment or even something that made you believe in the power we have and never imagined. Who knows, maybe your experience will inspire us to tell a new story in the future. Imagine seeing your story transformed into a tale that can move other people around the world. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like it. This not only motivates me, but also shows me that sharing these experiences makes a difference. After all, together we can create a space full of love, empathy, and good stories. So let's go. Like, comment, and, of course, share. Who knows, the next chapter will be inspired by you.